SAP is the simplified approval process, and what it tries to do is to reduce the time and effort needed in the preparation, review, approval, and disbursement procedures of a specific group of proposals. Now, these proposals have an eligibility criteria of 1, they should require not more than 10 million USD of GCF contribution. 2, they should have minimal to no environmental and social risks and impacts. In other words, ESS category C. And lastly, they should be ready for scale-up. Now, the surprising thing that we found is that there's a very little significance in the time and effort taken by SAP projects as proposed to the normal access modality, which we call the PAP. We actually found that SAP projects take a median number of days, 365, whereas the PAP takes 399 days.
So the intent was that the SAP was going to create a simplified set of documentation requirements. So on one side, on one part, the requirements or the templates attempted to have shorter documentation requirements. But on the other hand, the review process, the technical review, both by the Secretariat and the ITAP, the technical advisory panel, did not change. So that kind of crashed against each other. On one hand, you're providing less information, but on the other hand, you're measuring the requirements at the same level.
Effectively, what it means is that in a fewer number of words, you still have to provide the same kind of justification and the same kind of explanation for the same criteria that are being used for full funded proposals. What the IU is therefore recommending is that the board consider and discuss possibly different criteria for simplified approval process funding proposals. These might include, but are not restricted to, for example, considering climate rationale, implementation ability, innovation, and others.
When looking at the composition of the SAP portfolio, we found that 11 proposals are from the public sector and 2 are from the private sector. We also found that 10 out of the 13 are adaptation projects, 1 is mitigation, and 2 are cross-cutting.
The GCF is still working on sort of on a one-size-fits-all. So they have many processes that do not discriminate, let's say, according to the type of entities that you're dealing with. And in particular, we make a recommendation about the private sector. If the GCF is interested in engaging with the private sector, they need to understand what the private sector needs are and like they told us very clear for the ones that we interviewed, it's not an issue of the size or the level of risk, because they said, we have proposals for all sizes and all levels. We accommodate to the sources of funding. But what they wanted was it has to be predictable, it has to be transparent. So I think the number one recommendation will be a clear strategy that connects the approaches that are proposed to the intent and the GCF mandate.
One of the other findings of the rapid assessment has been that the private sector is not well represented in the overall portfolio. This was surprising to the team, primarily because the SAP represents a modality that can be both simplified as well as accelerated, but the private sector has not risen to either the opportunity or the challenge of the SAP. This is, again, something that we are suggesting can and should be addressed in the SAP strategy. In the SAP strategy, the Secretariat should really lay out as to what are the key objectives of SAP, how there will be value added by SAP to the GCF overall objectives and the theory of change. And specifically, there should be a sub-strategy that is directing its attention to the private sector.
What the GCF is doing is comparable to what many other organizations do. Most of organizations had some form of fast-track process to accelerate or to simplify the processing of smaller or simpler projects. When we look into the approaches to actually fast-track the processes, there are many ways this is being done, and this usually involves different types of simplifications depending on different stages of the process.
On one side, I think what we are finding is that the GCF has, very much like other organizations, customized its own requirements for simplification and acceleration. But what we are also discovering is that other agencies have not set standards. So there are no global standards for what is simplified or what is accelerated. Clearly, the GCF can be a leader in this space and can set up standards that can show as to how SAP is different from the full funding proposal cycle. In this, it can set standards for the world, but also for itself. Some of the things that we have suggested in terms of simplification and acceleration then point towards how the GCF can show leadership in this overall process. Well, indeed, one of the key recommendations that we are making in the SAP Rapid Assessment is that there could be greater delegation of authority to the executive director of the GCF for processing and approving SAP proposals. One of the reasons that we are saying this is that there is sufficient precedence for this. We are seeing this, for example, in the fact that readiness and preparatory support grants are approved by the executive director, as well as the project preparation facility grants are also approved by the executive director. To be very clear, we're not suggesting that this would be the only way in which simplification and acceleration would be realized. But if the board were to consider the full suite of recommendations that we are making in the rapid assessment, including the one on delegation of authority, we think that the GCF may be able to realize its overall vision for the simplified approval process program modality.